I'm going to go back to my original timeline, which I can either go to the smart bin and find it, or I can just click on the drop down out here and go to timeline number 1. So I'm back on this timeline, and then I'm going to go to color and start to do some effects. Resolve started off life as a grading program. So obviously the grading and the color correction is excellent. And I could spend ages talking about all these curves and qualifiers and power windows and motion tracking and everything else. But I'm not going to go through that now. Just trust me, there's lots of really nice color correction in there. You can also add effects in here. The way Resolve works is through a series of nodes. So in Premiere or EDIUS, you'd put on one effect and then you'd stick another one on and they'd all get layered down in a little palette. Resolve is pretty similar, but it's done as a series of nodes. So you come up to this area here, which is called the nodes area. Just click on that thing, it disappears. When you look at this thing, that's the starting clip, that's the ending clip. This is where you're going to put an effect. So if I want to do some kind of effect on that, for instance, if I want to do a bit of color correction, then I could come in here and put some points on the curve and adjust these and adjust the color wheels. And I've done some kind of color correction effect on that. Now I want to stick in another node to use some of the other effects that we've got. So I'm going to come up to where it says nodes on the heading here and then add in a serial node. Now there's lots and lots of different types of nodes and they all do different kinds of things. I have to admit, most of the time I just use serial nodes. They're the easiest ones. So if I add in a serial node, this is just like your palette of effects inside of Premiere or EDIUS. That's the first effect. This is the second effect. I can then come over here to my list of effects, drag something and drop it on there. And there we are, I've embossed it. As soon as I've done that, you can fiddle with the settings here and emboss it in different ways or do whatever you feel like. I want to stick another effect on there. I'm going to add another serial node and I'm going to put, say, a directional blur on there. And now you've got a blur. So you get the idea. This is a bit like just layering effects. Now it can get a lot more complicated than that and actually more powerful than that because there's loads more things you can do than just treat it like you were layering on effects in Premiere or EDIUS. But at its simplest level, that's all you've got to do. Add on a node, shove an effect on it, fiddle with it. When it comes to the grading, you tend to do when you're doing grading, you tend to have loads of nodes. You'll have one node just changing the gamma, another node which is affecting his face, another node which is doing something else. And basically it's all just different layers of effects. You can tell with these ones that that's got some color correction effects on it because of those little icons underneath it. So if I make it a bit bigger. That one says it's got FX on it, which means it's got one of these open effects. Open effects is a particular type of plugin. So if you have lots of plugins from different people. If I go to the library here, I've got lots of Boris effects and lots of hit film effects. Then they all pop up here and I can start to drag them and drop them on and use them. And those two happen to have the two open effects on. One of them's got the blur on it and one of them's got the emboss on it. Now you can turn nodes off just by clicking on the words at the top or using Control D. Let's click on that. You can see I'm turning off those nodes there. So you can see what it's like without them. And of course you can delete them just by selecting the things and deleting. But this is what I'd use the color page for. I'd use it for adding effects to clips. You can also add an effect to the entire timeline. So if you come up to where it says clip here and click on that and go to timeline, you now have a node tree, which is completely empty, where I could add an effect to the entire timeline. Let me go to nodes and add a serial node. And it shoves one in there. And choose a Gaussian blur and whack it on there. And now every single clip on the timeline's got the Gaussian blur. Now I very rarely do that, but I would do that, say, if I wanted to put a film grain over an entire sequence, as opposed to just doing it per clip. I could just put it on absolutely everything just by choosing timeline there. You notice there is a film grain effect, so let me get rid of the Gaussian blur off there. I'm just going to go to the thing and right click and delete and add in another node. And then in this case, I'm going to put the film grain on the top of it. Because like I said, film grain will be something that I'd like to put over everything here to give it a filmic look. And you might notice there I've suddenly got this, which obviously if you read it is basically saying film grain is one of the things you only get if you buy Resolve. I'm using the free version here. I could just plug in my dongle and then I'll be okay to use this particular effect. But since I haven't, I can't use the film grain thing. I could try it out, but it's going to watermark it. So here, you know, I could adjust the settings of it, the look of the film grain. I don't think you can see anything about what's happening there in that very, very small window, but you could see it on the output through a Blackmagic card. I can make this a bit bigger by zooming into it. So maybe I can see what it's doing a bit better. And I can also do things like turn off these things, these little clips here, by clicking on clips. It turns that area off. Clicking on timeline, it turns that area off. So now maybe I've got a bigger area to preview what the effect looks like. But what I can't do without using a Blackmagic card is to get that to pop up full screen in Resolve whilst I can adjust the stuff. That's what I was saying about the full screen playback. You do have this option to go into cinema mode, so it fills the entire screen. But if you do that, you can't get at the controls to adjust it. That's what's missing in Resolve, is the ability to do that. And that's what you need a Blackmagic card for. But yes, it's nice that you can put an effect on the entire timeline. Personally, I'm going to get rid of that and then just get on with the next bit. Let's pop this back to clip. Get the clips up again so I can see which one I'm fiddling with. And you can do lots of nice things here. So there's things like light rays, where you can have kind of rays like they're coming out of somewhere. All of this lot can be keyframed. Let's go to another one. You've got mirrors, so let's put a mirror on there. And now I've mirrored Ringo down the middle, which obviously just looks weird. If you look at the library here, you can see some of them say GPU and some of them say FX. The only real difference there is the GPU ones are done by the graphics cards. The one that says effects are done by your CPU. Resolve really uses the graphics card to do a lot of work, but it doesn't do it for all of them. And these ones that say effects on them are effects that are done by the CPU. Again, let's take that one off because that looks silly. A couple of other things which are worth mentioning. It's got motion tracking inside of this, which is actually very good. So let's go to this clip here. And let's just go to the start. Obviously it fades in. And I want to try tracking Ringo's head there. I did this in a tutorial I just done for EDIUS. Let's try and do it in Resolve. And I'm going to choose to do what's called a power window. So if you click on that, and I'm going to select a round one, it puts a little window up on screen, which constrains whatever effect you apply on that node is just applied to this window. So I'm going to make an effect that goes around Ringo's head. And I've got that set up, and I'm going to get it to track it. So having put the window on there, if I go to this thing, the tracker, I can then say, right, follow it. It's a very good tracker and it's very fast. And you notice it lost it there just as Ringo's head was going down towards the table. But if you watch my EDIUS tracking demo, you noticed EDIUS did the same thing, Premiere did the same thing. And obviously there's ways where I could enhance it and so on. I won't bother to go through that now. Suffice it to say, it is a very good tracker and it does very good results. But you can use it to then apply an effect to that particular layer. So I could do something very, very simple, like just brighten up the area around Ringo or darken it down or mosaic it or whatever. It's got a nice keyer in it as well. Now the keyer inside of it you generally use with this thing, which is what they call a qualifier. So let me get hold of another clip. I'm going to go back to the edit tab and I'm going to grab hold of this clip here, which has got an awful lot of red on it. And I'm going to take it and throw it onto the timeline, because what I'm going to try and do is key out that red area. Now, it would be nice if I could load up a proper chroma key clip and do that, but all my chroma key clips happen to be in formats which Resolve doesn't handle, so I'll have to convert them first. So rather than do that, I'll just do a quick one on this red bit here. So now I'm going to go back to the color page, and you notice now I've got another clip in here, which is that red clip. And I want to do something to the red panel. Now, generally, you use the keyer as part of a qualifier. So that's this second thing here with an eyedropper. The idea is you'll pop up to the screen and you'll click on something, and then everything that's kind of that color will get selected. Now, you might notice my node here has changed to have a bit of gray and a bit of red, and that's giving me a rough idea what's selected. But I can get that same kind of view up here just by clicking on this little icon. Now you can see the bit of the image that I've selected. I can then fiddle with this, so I can move the center, make the range of colors wider, change the range of saturations, fiddle with it basically to try and make it better and make it a better key. You know, if I click on the plus, it'll add the reds in around there, but it's suddenly got his nose coming in. Let's try and get rid of the nose and so on. but basically you fiddle around until you've got a nice sort of key, then turn that thing off, and then you can do something with the range of colors that you've selected. So, in this case, I'm making that area blue. And of course, I haven't done a perfect job because I haven't selected it properly. But that is what normally you use the keying for inside of Resolve. But it's also possible for using this kind of color grabbing as a way of keying out a background. This clip is definitely over the other clip. So if I was to say, well, use what I've just worked out and use it to make a hole in this clip, I'd see other clips underneath it. Now, the way you do that is not immediately obvious because, normally I'd put a keyer onto something, click the green, and then it would be transparent. In Resolve, you have to add something else. You have to come up into the node area here and right-click and say Add Alpha Output. And that adds another output. This is the picture. This is adding the transparency output. And if you look on the node here, you'll notice the node's got a couple of connections. So there's the top one, which is the picture output. And then there's this little triangle, which is the alpha output. So if I take that and point it to that one, it's going to use this node to decide what part of this image of Ringo gets transparent. And what it's done is it's decided to keep that area, that thing that I've made blue, and get rid of Ringo, which is the wrong way round. But you can see it's done the idea. It's actually made a hole. Now to fix it, I've got to come to the key icon. Well, look, it looks like a key. And I've got to say, swap it round. Go to the qualifier and click on that and invert it. So one way round, it does one part of the image. The other way round, it does the other part of the image. And now you can see I've kept Ringo and got rid of that red thing. And I hadn't done a perfect key because I wasn't planning on doing a proper key. And actually, there's quite a lot of ways where you can refine it. You can even add in several nodes and make them all do different parts of the key. Bit more complicated than I want to go right now. You can see Ringo's gone blue, and you might say, what's going on there? Well, if you remember, I actually was originally using this to change the color of this thing to blue. So I've got some stuff on that node which is doing that. If I reset all these things, Ringo would go back to a normal color. And now all it's done is just key out the red bit. If you go back to the qualifier, there's actually different types of keying you can do. And this new one, the 3D keyer they added in, is very good at keying stuff out. And like I say, you can combine several of them to make a nice key. So it's a nice thing that you actually got in there. It's just not immediately obvious. Now, if you find the keying in here isn't good enough, pretty good keying for a program, but it's not brilliant, you could go to a compositing program. Blackmagic have a compositing program, and it's called Fusion. Now I'm going to come back to the Edit tab, and I'm going to say, I want to take this clip into Fusion, please. So I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to use this thing called Fusion Connect. And it's jolly clever because what it does is it takes that clip, makes a copy of it in another format, loads up Fusion, and lets you do Fusion-y stuff. And then when you render it out of Fusion, it puts the render back onto the timeline inside of Resolve. Now, obviously, it works with Fusion because Fusion is another Blackmagic program, and there is a free version of that. It's the free version of Fusion 8 I've got on this timeline. So what I'm going to do is choose a format from here. Obviously, starting off with DPX, which is a bunch of uncompressed stills, which isn't a bad way of doing it. It'll take up quite a lot of space. So maybe I'll change it to QuickTime, and maybe I'll change it to just DNX HD, which is much more reasonable size. I've decided where to stick it, and I'm going to say, yep, do it, and then open that clip up in Fusion. Bang. Now you have to wait for it to render the stuff, which will take time and space. Up pops Fusion, and then it'll load it up into Fusion and set you up a composition already. So I've got the stuff coming in, the stuff going out, and then I've got to do stuff in the middle. And I'm not going to give you a tutorial of Fusion. Let me just add on effect, which is going to make it obvious that something's happening. I'm going to go to Tools, and then Color Corrector. I'd never take a clip from Fusion to Resolve to color correct it, but I'm just doing that so you can see something. I'm going to render it. You can see off it goes rendering. Okay. Let me shut down Fusion and come back into here, and there we are. You can see I've now got a Fusion clip on the timeline as opposed to my original. I can right click on it, go back to the Fusion Connect, and I can open it again in Fusion. Basically, it's a really nice way of doing things. It's not quite the same as the Adobe Dynamic Link between After Effects and Premiere, because I am rendering at both ends. to actually get it into Fusion, then I have to render to go out of Fusion to get back to Resolve. On the other hand, it's a nice little way of getting stuff out of here into Fusion. The only thing about using Fusion is it's a node-based compositor, so it's a little bit like using the nodes here inside of Resolve, except it's more complicated than that. And if you're used to using After Effects or a program like that, it's going to take you a bit of learning to get used to it. But it is a very powerful program, and there is a free version. So again, you can get into a nice complex compositing thing for free. Only other thing I really want to say about effects is if I pull the timeline up, you'll remember back here I actually had a title which moves in. For a lot of my tutorial stuff, I have a set way of doing a title, and I like to put a little motion blur on the title as it comes in. You'd think you've got a title there, you can come into here and then you can add a node onto that title and put on of some kind of blur with an effect. You can't. You can't add any of these effects to titles. If I was to make up the title as a still image, say in Photoshop, and then bring it in, then I could put an effect on it. But I can't put an effect onto a Resolve title. It's just another one of the limitations of the titles in there. So the titling in Resolve is a bit limited. But yeah, you do have other options. Things like New Blue Titler Pro works in Resolve. Boris Title Studio, which is part of Continuum, should work in Resolve. So there are other options. But of course, another option is to use Fusion. If you can get to learn Fusion, you could actually make a title up in Fusion and then render it and whack it back onto the timeline. And there you can do some really complicated titles if you know how to use Fusion. Now, again, lots more things I could tell you about here, particularly about the grading, which is absolutely brilliant. But I'm not going to do that. I'm now going to go on to the final page, which is the Deliver page. Because the Deliver page is the other area where I think Resolve falls down.